All right, let's start it up. Can everyone see my screen right now? Gatsby for agencies from Pitch to Publish. If you can't, let me know in the chat. Start with a little housekeeping. This will be recorded. So if you need to jump at any time during the meeting, we will email you. The copy probably in the next like 48 hours. Usually takes us a little bit of time to process, get some captions on there. But if you do stick around, we'll be doing a live Q&A throughout the session and especially at the end. So feel free to drop any questions. And like I said, if you do have questions, keep it in the QA. There's a QA and a chat session. It's a lot easier for us to handle in the Q&A portion of Zoom webinar. So that's basically our housekeeping today. All right, so let's look at what we're going to be talking about. Today, I'm joined by Grayson Hicks, and we are going to be talking about pitching and publishing your website for a client. So we're going to cover selling Gatsby, what the Gatsby platform is all about from the framework to cloud, finding client fit and how Gatsby and who Gatsby really is a great fit for. And then we'll actually go into getting started with maybe setting up a staging environment, with setting up POC. We'll be looking at Contentful today, and we can go through some of the live demo and get your brain spinning, ask some questions, and hopefully today will be a pretty back and forth live action. Don't feel like you have to sit there and watch slides. There are some hopefully good slides today that we will be sending out and you can use to pitch your clients on Gatsby. So feel free to take today, at least the slide portion, as some of the lessons of how we can better enable you to go pitch and explain Gatsby to your clientele. All right, so let's kick it off with selling Gatsby. Gatsby is the front end for the headless web. This is going to be a common theme we talk about today. Something we really want to position it as and message is that for clients with a backend system, for clients with a CMS, for building their website, for building their application with data, with content, Gatsby is the front end for them. It has a lot of unique differentiators we'll talk about, and a lot of features that are centered just around this use case, which is obviously a growing use case on the modern web. So why headless in general? We have these 5 points here. Performance is going to be maximized in a headless environment. You're going to have a faster optimized website when we talk about static site generation, decoupling your monolith and that large database that's connected. So performance is really that #1 hit. The second is security, decoupled websites and taking, again, that CMS away from your front end. You're going to have a lot less open connections. You're going to have a lot less attack surfaces for plugin systems through like WordPress to really maliciously target your website. And then scalability. No need to scale web servers and have that traditional web server be able to add in either new CPU or just upgrade your plan as around the holiday period. You're going to get a much more scalable website when you decouple that architecture and you're just serving your front end on an edge network. Next is flexibility. For me and actually for clients, I think too, this is a huge one because once you start to unlock or once you start to see what you can unlock with a headless implementation, the possibilities are really endless. So having the ability to put JavaScript components, different CMSs next to each other, have more interactive design, and not be really tied down to that initial platform, that initial CMS that you buy into, it's huge for clients. No longer are you getting those features that you can't bring in or build out because, again, you're tied to CMS. You now really have a much more flexible platform with React and JavaScript and Gatsby's plugin system in general to be able to go build those really rich interactive experiences. And lastly, productivity, especially from the developer side. It's just a lot more pleasant, intuitive experience for development, for the development community to work with a headless framework like Gatsby rather than working in, again, like a PHP templates, whether that's Drupal or like with an API extension from some of the new site builders. All right, so Gatsby makes it simple for agencies and clients to build those amazing experiences together. So developers source content into React components and templates. It's going to look, again, if you're from a WordPress world, we think of things very similarly with templates and components. It's just nice and React and, again, intuitive from a modern dev experience. Then content authors write content in their favorite CMS of choice that is wired up and connected through our data layer that we'll go through. And then that is exposed in the form of a website, and we display that content in the web browser. So you can see here, we have like the H1 title, description, CTA. We're filling those in the middle here, and then it's displaying. So this is just a really easy way for you to visualize with your client how the setup works. And then you can source content from any source to build a fast, secure, and scalable website. We'll talk about kind of this triangle here with our platform, but we really think of ourselves as a decoupled platform with code and obviously the React that developers are digging into, CMS and the UI that seamlessly connects either with our Quick Connect or just with our source plugins. We integrate out of the box with systems like Contentful, WordPress, Dado, Content Stack, Shopify, pretty much any major headless CMS at this point. And then our plugin architecture that allows you to add in increased functionality quickly. So tools like Google Analytics, maybe Marketo forms, HubSpot forms, all those things tangentially that you need to build a website today. We have a plugin system for that, and you can add it literally in seconds, wire up an API key, maybe in a config file, and you're good to go. You have all that added functionality from a third-party service now in your Gatsby website. So let's talk a little bit about this triangle pattern in the Gatsby platform in general. The Gatsby platform consists of three different parts. The content layer, which is huge for our clients that are working with CMSs. We source, normalize, and then persist all of that content and data from their headless CMS, from their shopping system in a GraphQL data layer that, again, it normalizes the data. We'll be pulling it out into our templates in a really nice, intuitive manner. And that could be from, let's say, Contentful, and then right next to it, it could be WordPress. And we can mix and match our data sets on the pages themselves. Next is the framework. This is like the bare bones, what the developers are dealing with on a daily basis. It's the components, the templates, the styles of how React is built today. It's also the lazy loading, the prefetching. It's the things that Gatsby comes with out of the box. Also coupled with that, though, are things like the starter community and then themes, which themes are really centralized. Like you can think about them as centralized config management for multiple starters. It's abstracting features, code, configuration out of one starter into a way that you can share them across. So let's say you have a lot of customers in one vertical and you're building a lot of the same components, a lot of the same layouts, maybe a lot of the same plugins. You can kind of rope that into a theme and you can centrally manage that across your clients with one update, with one pattern. So it's a really nice way to kind of control a bunch of your clients' websites without needing to go into each one. Lastly is the cloud. So the content layer, the framework, the plugins, they're all built onto our cloud platform, which is a way to build, preview, and then deploy your website. So build, we're going to optimize and cache your builds. We have incremental builds. So anything that goes through the content layer can be rebuilt incrementally. That's going to take just seconds to rebuild. We'll go through a demo today with Grayson of showing you that update and how quickly it happens. And then it gives you access to preview of your undrafted content. Again, we'll show off in the demo. You can preview PR merges or pull requests, merge requests, and kind of work on maybe a feature that you want to release or a redo of the website. You can have that in Gatsby Cloud on a pull request branch, preview that with your clients as if it was in a live environment, and they'll be able to work on that. And then lastly, the Edge network. So the global Edge network that puts your entire website on Fastly's CDN and delivers your site in milliseconds. So Walking through quickly, we'll have a slide for each, the framework, the content layer, and the cloud. You can use this to better walk through your clients. The framework itself, the top three here are our new rendering or our rendering modes, and two of them are new to Gatsby 4. So we always are known for our static site generation. Gatsby generates all of your content at build time, which is why in general, static sites take a little bit longer to build and can be a little bit confusing for the client until they use them and they see how blazing fast and responsive that fully static site is. Incremental builds though really help solve that problem. And then also what we did, we came out with something called deferred static generation, which further alleviates kind of that long tax you have at the build time, where we're able to defer non-critical pages, blogs you can think about from 5 years ago that don't need to take all of your time at build time. We can render them at runtime for the first time and then put them on the cached network. So just that first user that requests that 5-year-old blog, they might take 2 milliseconds to load. Maybe it's going to feel much more like a server-side rendering app for that first time. And then it's cached immediately. But again, it's an innovative way to really take advantage of more static site generation features and capabilities in a larger site that maybe you were kept to server-side rendering, which is also our latest rendering mode that we came out with Gatsby 4. This is something that has been around the web for a while. It's how most of the web is really, I would say, served up today. It's hosted on the edge, and you can still, actually it's not, sorry, server-side rendering is not on the edge at this time, but you're gonna be able to dynamically generate content, like let's say a Twitter feed on the fly. So you can take a component, a page request, and in real time, update that data. And I'll fix that, sorry about that. Incremental builds we talked about, so I won't go through that again. Functions, another really great service on Gatsby Cloud Platform that is going to be serverless functions that will allow you to quickly manipulate data, either enter, grab it, optimize, transform something. With something like a form, functions are great. You can connect to really any database, have a form filled out, and send that data to the database live. You can transform images, anything like that you can do with our serverless functions. And then lastly, the framework comes out of the box with our image optimization Gatsby image plugin. It optimizes images at runtime and is just one of the slickest ways, I think, to deal with media on the web today. Next, the content layer. It's built for modern content development. It is an abstracted data layer powered by GraphQL that we'll see. We can actually go through a little demo. Hopefully we can look at our graphical and kind of just see how the data sitting there, and we can grab it down into our template in a normalized pattern. It's also great because that data persists. So let's say you have a build and a service like Contentful goes down. Your data is not going to go down. Your website's not going to go down. It's all cached in the data layer, and it's going to be there for backup. So a ton of reliability with that data layer. And then lastly, again, the cloud we talked about, it's going to be the fastest builds and deploys for Gatsby experience. GatsbyJS.com, we use Contentful and Airtable, WordPress. We have a lot of kind of CMSs in the back end. We have over 10,000 pages. A incremental build for us coming from Contentful takes anywhere from 7 to 15 seconds to build. So as soon as I publish on Contentful a new word, a new typo fix, it's going to be on the website or built in 7 seconds. And then we're seeing deploy times of around 5 to 9 seconds. So again, within under 20 seconds on a 10,000 page static, fully static site, we can get our content live to production, which just really changes the game around static site and where you can deploy it. Shareable previews, it's a great feature that we have where we take your unpublished content in draft mode and we'll push it to a preview server. So you can look how that content's going to look before pushing it live. And then lastly, it comes with that edge hosting network. So you can host your website, apply a custom domain, get SSL all for free, and deliver your content to milliseconds around the globe. Lastly, this is just a quick slide for Gatsby Cloud previews. We would definitely say previews when you're talking with clients. it's going to be a big point of contention. It's something that if they're coming from WordPress, if they're coming from Drupal, they're going to be used to having a system where they can hit a preview and see that content immediately. Gatsby Cloud is the closest thing in the Jamstack universe to having that ability of a completely static site that is decoupled from the front end and the back end, with still this really seamless end-to-end preview experience that is super helpful for marketers and content creators to not really worry about how the site is built. They don't need to know, in fact. It just gives this really nice experience of, hey, I'm editing in the CMS, I can see the content there in that preview server. All right, so who is Gatsby a good fit for? We'll go through a couple slides of kind of verticals, and then a land and expand motion before we get into the demo. So first, any client who needs really any of these, from content management to form to payment to e-commerce management, all of that is great with Gatsby because it's going to be a decoupled front end from any best-in-class backend. So if you have forms, payments, again, content, we're going to be able to supply that front end for you. Any client who needs SEO considerations, zero downtime, zero hacks, and great security, all of that is going to be better supplied by Gatsby. And then lastly, we'll talk about a little bit of design and then that fancy feature. It's really important when you choose a platform, and even more so if you're not choosing decoupled and you go monolithic, that platform is going to be able to grow at the needs and the requests of your customer and client base. And that's something that can really hurt because you can box yourself in. You can think you're offering this great experience to a customer, and then they ask for this one thing that is out of the bounds of the platform, and all of a sudden you either have to say no, or now you're working on redoing it in another platform that maybe offers that. With a decoupled front end and back end with Gatsby, that is just, you're not going to box yourself in as much. You're going to have kind of the endless possibilities of the React community, of Gatsby community, of third-party services that you can leverage to really bring those capabilities in. Here's just a quick sampling of some of our customers across e-commerce, B2B marketing, finance, and kind of fintech in general, and then public organizations. I'd also throw in here like media organizations and news publishing. A great example, we just had that awesome webinar with Penn State and running their Penn State news site. But any of these are awesome examples of sites that we can build with Gatsby that they're going to be better than they were previously with their prior CMS. And then just really quickly to like walk through a land and expand motion that we've seen be really successful with not only our sales team, but with other agencies in general, is a concept of working on a small portion of a large site, right? Sites today, every function in big companies needs kind of their own little home on the web to display content, to communicate to their customers. And one of the ways that Gatsby can really grow with them is this land and expand model. So start from maybe developer-led documentation, or see a client that has documentation that is in Gatsby, and then maybe talk about like migrating their blog from WordPress or Drupal into a Gatsby infrastructure, into a headless concept. And that can kind of be, again, take up a large chunk of kind of that marketing pages. Maybe they have 2,000 blogs. You can put those over in a template with Gatsby and do that fairly quickly. Next, expanding is that largest probably portion of the marketing site, right? Is like the big marketing site that the marketing team needs to update on a daily basis. It's probably got like a lot more bespoke templates, bespoke components. It's probably going to be the biggest portion of money, but you're already going to have proven yourself with maybe a blog redesign or doc redesign. Lastly, and with the App Store, you can start growing into more headless solutions. So maybe work with Zendesk or a community system like Lithium and start bringing those pieces of content into kind of this unified front end where you can have your marketing, your careers, your section, your blog, your documentation, all with a decoupled front end and like a shared design library that makes updating things and building new digital products a breeze, because you already have not only a design system now, but you have a development and component system across all these different subdomains or sub-functionalities. And again, it's just a really nice way to prove what Gatsby can do with the scale, like on a doc to blog, and then move that over to more general content creators. And we see this as really successful, both again on our own sales team, but also with other agencies that we work closely with. All right, so last kind of slide here is actually just a way we recommend working with clients in Gatsby Cloud. And that's through separate workspaces with clients. So here's an example of 2 separate workspaces with multiple repos, multiple maybe subdomains or websites underneath. But still it allows for users, billing, concurrency, bandwidth to be separated. So that is really the main draw between working out of workspaces. Those things are separate. You're not running over with different clients. Maybe they have a spike in bandwidth that'll affect another client if kept in the same workspace. Same thing with users. You can kind of clamp down on who can see things and helps when you are working across multiple clients at once. So workspaces are definitely kind of the go-to recommended way as agencies. You can better work with clients in Gatsby Cloud. All right, so this is the last slide. I've been talking nonstop for like 20 minutes, and I would love to hear Grayson's voice and start checking out a demo of Gatsby Cloud. So Grayson, you mind if I start sharing my screen with you? And we can start that up. You should be able to now. Sweet. I can see your screen.
Thanks for talking for 20 minutes, Dan. It's all great. Well, hi everyone. I'm Grayson Hicks. I'm a software engineer here at Gatsby. A lot of what I do is work with our enterprise clients and our agency clients in different forms of consulting, whether it's performance audits to make their sites faster. We also have a new offering now, a new service where we help you build the site, right? Like we'll meet with you a few times a week to make sure there's best practices going on and everything's being built, so it can scale and be the best that it can be. So really excited about this demo. I'm going to show you like as much as I can show you. There's so much that Dan just talked about. It's like basically everything of Gatsby. But I'm going to show you how to like just one of the best ways to get up and running and be like, what does this Gatsby thing really feel like? So we have first class integrations with a lot of CMSs. So if I'm not using your CMS here, don't take it personally. I'm just using one that I know I can get up and running quickly. I also know it's one of the leaders in the headless CMS space. So I'm going to use Contentful. I'm going to skip a few steps of like config and stuff, but not very many. I want to show you like I'm not going to be cutting that much out and how quickly you can get up and running. Things that I've already done. I've already cloned the repo, like the starter repo. I'm going to go ahead and put this link. Can everyone still see my screen? You see a GitHub page now, Dan?
I'm muted. I do see your GitHub page though.
Cool. All right. So this GitHub page is for a Gatsby starter that's maintained by us and the Contentful team to get you up and going. So another thing I cut out here is actually creating my Contentful space. So I have a Contentful space here. I go home, you just go sign up for Contentful, create a space. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing you'll need to do is set up some API keys. So I've set up some API keys and an access token, right? Besides that, it's going to take care of the rest for you. So you're going to clone the repo, which again, I've already done that. And then this is like one of my favorite parts is normally when you try to do one of these demos with a CMS, you're like, well, I don't want to go create 10 blog posts on my own. And then I forget a field and how do I wire that up exactly to how the data is in the starter? This takes care of that, right? So I've already run this step, but there's a command in here called npm run setup. That's you're gonna, well, let's see what it does. I've already run it. I can probably just cancel out. Yeah, so I'll cancel out of this, but it's gonna ask for those things that you just set up in Contentful. You create the space, you get a space ID, you're gonna get these API keys, and it's gonna ask you for all of them, and you just keep pasting them in there, hit enter, and then behind the scenes, it's going to come into your Contentful space here and create this content for you. A bunch of fake blog posts, a couple fake people, right? It's going to do everything it needs to do for the data model to actually work. So I cut that out, but it probably took me 5 minutes overall, cloning the repo, creating the space, and running npm run setup to get this demo going. So I cut that out for you. Even though I probably talked for like 3 minutes, so I could have just shown you maybe. But cool. So that's set up. I've installed the node modules, and now I'm just going to get it up and running locally first, because I'd love to introduce just kind of the Gatsby build process, but then also introduce the graphical data layer or the GraphQL data layer that Dan talked about. This is hands down my favorite part of Gatsby. Like, we can talk about it, we can say it over and over, but you don't really see the power of it until you try it out. So the build is up. It's running now locally. So this is what it would look like if you're running local development. It started like a Webpack server, and it's going to hot reload when you change files, all that good stuff. In my browser now is this is the demo site that you get out of this. It's pretty nice. Great, but this could be built by anything. The really cool part, the Gatsby part, is this data layer here. So this is called Graphical. This is a tool that lets you explore a GraphQL server, right? It's kind of like self-documenting as well. Like, you can see all the data that exists that Gatsby knows about. So right now we're just using Contentful, right? And you can see that, well, actually, I don't know if you can see. Let me zoom in. You can see that the Contentful plugin has created all these types automatically based off of the data model that's in Contentful. So that's like the power of the source plugin. And we have lots of source plugins, right? So if you were hooked up to Contentful for this, and you've got some legacy data in WordPress, then you've got some Shopify products, right? You add the plugin and they're all going to exist here. Then when you get to the front end, let's pull up a component, right? Then if I were in this blog post, I could query data from anywhere. And as a front-end developer, it doesn't really feel like it's coming from different places, right? We've all probably had a component before or like a sidebar on a homepage or something where it's like, all right, I have to reach this API, which has these weird quirks. I got to go look at their docs. Oh, then I have to hit this like custom database that we have. I got to remember how to, I got to have like an ORM to connect to that, and then fetch some data from there. Then I got to fetch data from here. Then I have to blend it all together to make this sidebar item object, right? And like mash it all together and transform it and merge it and whatever from all these different data sources, so that as a front-end developer, it feels like it's one thing now, right? With the way Gatsby GraphQL works, that it doesn't happen like that, right? You just add a query in here, get what fields you want, and then it all comes in as props, right? This .props, .title, whatever, it just comes in as props. So it feels super, super unified. So let's go back and look at Graphical, some of the cool things you can do. So let's say we want to query all of our blog posts. What Graphical does is it helps you build out that query in a visual way without having to just like remember to type it all, right? So you can just click, all Contentful blog posts, and you can say, all right, for every node, I want to get the author. And then for every author, I want to get their name. I hit run. And we've got, I do have it zoomed in, so it looks a little wonky. So then we've got an array of all the authors and all their names. Cool. Then on the side here, it's like, all right, well, I'm playing around in Graphical. I've got the query the way I want it to look. Now I want to actually move it over to Gatsby. So then you've got a little snippet exporter here. So this would be if you're wanting to move this to a page query, you can just copy this. You've got your page query. It's a simple query, but imagine if we had some more complex stuff that I'll show in a second. It's just nice to not have to write it twice. Also, if you're going to move it to a static query, like as a use static query hook, you can do that automatically. Another cool one, if you're creating pages in Gatsby Node, I find myself like rewriting this stuff all the time. And we have a snippet now where you just fill in a few blanks, right? Like the slug and the path to the template you want to use. And you've got all your fields already there, because I'm constantly having to like go to the docs and copy the create pages function, and no longer, right? Cool. We said this was a simple query, but one really cool thing, if you've ever worked with GraphQL outside of Gatsby or like written a GraphQL server, this should feel like really exciting, but lots of custom resolvers are built into nodes that Gatsby creates. And what I mean by that is, if you were writing this by hand, a GraphQL server, you might have to use like some other GraphQL libraries to do this, of like, all right, I want to be able to filter, right? I want to be able to filter authors where the author's name equals Ben. right? Just this little filter, you'd have to write that logic, right? And then you'd have to add it to every query type. And so Gatsby comes with, filter, sort, limit, skip for pagination, distinct. You can get like max, min, total count, all kinds of things just are built in. So you have a lot of data that's just available at your fingertips. So you can see I added this filter. And so now it's in the query here. I run it and look, now I just get bin back, right? And I mean, it feels like magic to me when I do that. So that's the power of GraphQL and the data layer. And again, imagine that we're getting data from lots of different places right now. You can do all kinds of things. Another like more in-depth thing that we're not going to really get to cover here is we've got these resolvers. You can write your own custom resolvers. If you're more advanced with GraphQL and you know how to write resolvers, Gatsby has APIs to write custom resolvers. So that's super useful for like transforming data. Like say you have a really complex field. So like for our nodes, these are all pretty simple, right? But say you have like a computed field where it's like, I need to find like, take these 3 values, do something with them, and that's going to equal this new one. And instead of having to like do that logic in the front end, you can make a custom resolver and you can have like, oh, my new complex field here, and it's already computed, way ahead of time. You can also link and relate different types and, relate an author to a blog post, all that kind of stuff. So really, really high level GraphQL APIs are available. Cool. So if you can't tell, I love GraphQL with Gatsby. It's really, really cool. One kind of way to think about this as well is as a front-end developer, when I was first learning, it was all about separation of concerns, right? It was like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, they all get their own file. They all do their own thing. They do not work together, right? And then of course, Gatsby uses React, and React is one of those templating languages. It was like, hey, we're actually going to bring some logic and like some interactivity into the markup. So JSX is like, hey, here's functionality and presentation, like all in one. And so then you have CSS and JS that comes along. And it's like, well, you know what? We're just going to throw our styling in there too. So with React, you can really have like all 3 of those all like mixed in together. And the separation of concerns sometimes happens like within the file or just within your head. Like you just have to know the different parts of the component. And then kind of the fourth part that I've always imagined is data, right? Like data is one of those separation of concerns. And so Gatsby brings the data into the style, the markup, and the interactivity as well. So if you look at a component here, right, it's just all together, styles, markup, and data. All right, so Daniel says I'm getting too technical. I hear you, Daniel. I'll move back to some high level stuff. I just get excited about the GraphQL stuff. I guess like the high level takeaway here is you can tell your client, you can bring data from anywhere really easily, plug in ecosystem. If you're using like one of these top tier CMSs, it's super easy to get up and running and get all your data in. Really great way to migrate legacy systems over to one of these, et cetera. So let's keep moving. So I've got my local development up. I can show, I guess one other thing, Daniel, I'd say is, okay, now Robbie says we want more tech speak. Okay, I'll try to keep it balanced here. Another thing, GraphQL is one of the main legs of Gatsby. The other one is React. So from a client perspective, using Gatsby means you get to use React. And when you get to use React, you have the biggest ecosystem of front-end tooling in the world, right? You have so many React libraries that can do so many things. You can use like React 3 Fiber, which is like a 3JS library. Look that up. People build these amazing interfaces. You can do that in Gatsby. A simple carousel or slider, like React carousel, you can use that. Anything in the React ecosystem just works with Gatsby. So as far as like building components and having access for developers to build front-end components quickly, they have access to the best ecosystem of front-end libraries in the world. Great. So I'll stay away from like how this stuff is being created, and I want to stick more to the workflow stuff as an agency. So we've got our site. We've been developing locally. Works great. Cool. Now what do we do? We want to publish it, right? So I've pushed this up to a repo. So I've got my contentful repo here under my name, and I want to get it out onto the internet. So I'm going to go to Gatsby Cloud. I've clicked add a new site, and I'm going to import it from a Git repository. So I'll click next, GitHub. And again, obviously we are the part of the Gatsby Cloud team. So like this is how we're going to demo it, but you can use, it's a similar workflow for like any of these Jamstack type platforms. So I'm going to choose my contentful demo here and hit next. So it's linking up to that workspace. I'm going to have to grab some environment variables. So part of that setup command that I ran that you didn't get to see was was adding the environment variables. So I'm going to copy them. So now this step is connecting to my contentful instance here and actually adding an app behind the scenes that lets things like incremental builds and preview work really well. So cool, it's connected. I'm going to set up the site. Good. So environment variables. Let me get these other ones. I probably shouldn't be sharing these, but I don't think it really matters. That's one of the good things about the Jamstack, right? So I'm going to give my API keys. And my access token. I don't actually need the access token for preview. So these are my build variables. So we're going to have like a build environment, which is really what goes out to the world. But then if you notice here, we have our preview variables. So that's going to be for like kind of internally for you and your developers and your content editors for previewing content. So this is a separate set of tokens and such. So I can get rid of that one and that one. Cool. So hopefully I got all these right. All right, so now it's starting its first build. So this shouldn't take long, but while we're waiting, any questions so far? I have a multi-domain, multi-language project. How I structure that in Gatsby Cloud? Do I have one for every domain, a separate project under one workspace? So that's kind of like a double whammy, like multi-domain and multi-language. Contentful happens to be really good for like internationalization. I typically recommend like definitely separate sites per language, because then you have like all those builds running concurrently. Like say you update a blog post, and so it's rebuilding the Japanese version of the site, rebuilding the English version of the site, and they're happening at the same time. That's how I like to do it. And then each site has its own domain settings. So, Gatsby Cloud has a hosting thing. So let's imagine that this is the English version of the site, but I have like 5 more for different ones. That would likely be controlled through an environment variable that would say like language code or something like that. That's then brought into your Gatsby config, which I'll show you quickly. So we've got our Gatsby config, which is like the heart and soul of like how your Gatsby site is configured. But you could pass in an option to contentful or in your Gatsby node and filter by a certain language that's read off an environment variable. So that would be how I would do it. And then every site would have its own custom domain set up as well. Do we have marketing pieces to help sell Gatsby to clients? I'll leave that to Dan.
Yeah, I was going to share our partner client after this, our partner portal, and you can get those in there, but I will send them to right now in the chat.
Cool. Trying to think of anything that Dan talked about that I haven't shown. Oh, one thing I didn't show that we talked about is the deferred static generation. This is only pulling in a handful of blog posts right now, right? So this is not super real world, but let's imagine that we're looping over our posts here from Contentful and creating each page. Let's imagine that we wanted to defer pages that had a low that were more than 2 years old, right? So it'd be like, okay, we have this defer option right here that goes in that tells Gatsby, you know what, ignore this page for now during the build and only build this page the first time someone requests it. So you would say like, all right, defer would be post dot created date is greater than, date. I can't remember how to get, 2 years, right? But like pseudocode is greater than 2 years, right? And when that's true, it will defer it. So you can have lots of pages. You can hook it up into Google Analytics and be like, hey, if it has like just a low hit count, if it's just not a popular blog page, and you might want to check the date too in case it's a brand new post, right? If it's more than 6 months old and it has a low hit count, defer it. Really, whatever logic you want can be in that defer right there.
Yeah, once that first user grabs it, it's then up in the cache and behaves just like a static site. I think like that's the biggest thing when comparing is it's still an atomic build. You'll be able to roll back, but it's all consistent to that one build, and then you're just deferring for one tiny user that gets a user request. But past that, it's all static.
Cool. All right, so the build's complete. 43 seconds total. This is our build platform, and then over here you'd have the preview. So the preview is going to be kind of like a live updating, but not public facing like instance. So let's try this out. What's that main post? John Doe. Oh, that's a person. Let me see. Let's mess with draft content. How about that? So we're going to say draft content test. Publish changes. And then if we go back to preview here.
You just published it.
Oh, I did publish it. Well, that's okay. You know what? I don't think I have the webhooks set up. Okay, yeah, it's working on builds. I don't have the preview set up quite right. That would probably take me a few more minutes. But you can see it just did a data update from Contentful, right? And so Gatsby Cloud recognizes there was a data update, which is super important. It knows, hey, this wasn't a code change. This was a data change. So it's going to go on the separate path that's a lot faster. If we were to look at this actual build log, you can tell kind of like what happened. Right here, it's like one updated entry. Gatsby's like super smart about knowing what actually updated. We should see that it only rebuilt a couple pages, right? So then if I were to go back to our site. Oops. Oh, I know what this is. Sorry, I left some code in here. This should not be here. Sorry, y'all. We'll give you a 404. Well, we get to see how fast this code change goes through. So you can see a code change
Lighthouse
build. So I just removed this path prefix that I know was broken and causing that 404 because I was messing with it earlier. I push it up. So now we go back to Gatsby Cloud and we see that triggered a build because it's hooked into the GitHub repo. And so that should take pretty quickly.
Two questions real quick too.
Yep.
You can answer while I'm there. Okay, is there any way to protect a published website in Gatsby Cloud? Sometimes it is necessary during a launch or relaunch of the project.
Yes. Yes and no. We've got some improvements coming to that. Right here, you can see the access control. So you can do some password protection. The password protection is not going to apply to this main URL though. That's something we're working on now, is adding password protection for like whatever domain you choose to use. A lot of times people use this for their preview environment or for these. If you notice, each build gets its own. Okay, that's done. Each build gets its own hashed build URL. So it lets you see that build in that point in time. And those can be password protected. So yeah. So that's fixed, and then you can see this. So let's do it. Let's do it. Let's take it off now. Take off our test here. Publish. And seeing this incremental build is, again, I don't have the preview hooked up, but you can imagine it working in the same way. Takes a couple seconds. Now if I refresh the page, test is gone. So that's how preview would work as well. The difference is preview is working now. Preview will have this little indicator here that will tell you when something is happening, which is useful. Yeah, I mean, that's the bulk of it. I don't know if we want to pause now and do questions for the rest. But that's like the bulk of the workflow. There's obviously a lot more to get into. There's some Gatsby features I didn't cover. So if you have questions about like Gatsby core, if you have questions about the workflow, let me know.
That's awesome, Grayson. Thank you. A couple questions, and I'll answer a couple of them on the fly. Actually, it's a great question about the Lighthouse stuff, Patrick. Right now, I believe that the Lighthouse score is, so it's not exposed via API currently. Like you can't grab that. It is in the build log, so you would be able to like grab it with another tool like New Relic, which we've done some work on. But yeah, interesting to think about how to grab this and put it like on the bottom of your website. I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, and then there's a question about support a little bit. So working with Shopify and the Shopify Gatsby starter, if I have questions, I dropped to gatsbyjs.com/support. You can take out a ticket if you're on Gatsby Cloud, talk to great people like Grayson. They can help solve problems. Also, we have a concierge. Gatsby Concierge is a program we had for really like white glove, high enablement or high touch enablement around the framework, around Gatsby Cloud, that we can help you kind of walk through with your clients and get make sure you have everything set up in the perfect way, prestigious way. Like we'll handle it all for you, kind of as your partner there. So that's called Gatsby Concierge. If not that, then feel free to take out a support ticket. Do you know a good library for a headless e-commerce card? I'm not shopping cart maybe. Might be the question there. I mean, I know Shopify is redoing their cart API actually, and that's a big focus for them. Obviously, that can all still be used with our API. So feel free to check out the starter. I'll share it right now that Mantis was talking about.
Yeah, I know I've used, I think Shopify even has like a buy button API, or maybe it's a card API. It's been a while since I've used it, but yeah, at that point, you're just in React land. So there wouldn't be really anything Gatsby specific to block you or anything from tracking the cart at runtime. Shopify is probably the most common e-commerce one. And it works really well up to like, 20, 30,000 SKUs or something, where you might run into scale issues with the way the Shopify API works. It uses the Shopify bulk operations API, which has some limitations. But I think the average e-commerce site is 500 SKUs. So it's, you got to be super, super large to be worried about that.
Yeah, I think that starter I just sent over to is like a great example, I think, for your clients that you could walk through them. I mean, send them, the layout is pretty, Spartan's a bad word, but it's pretty common across like e-commerce. Have it up next to a site that is like server-side rendering, and Grayson can like click around. Like it's pretty, I think, like silly how fast the e-commerce site is. Not only the build times from incremental, but like as you click around like images and go to different products, like it's just so snappy fast, and you can clearly feel that. So that's definitely something that I would share and build off as well. Question about Cloud API.
Much requested.
Yeah, much requested, and definitely in the short side of the backlog. So I would expect that to be delivered. I want to say Q1, but then product killing me. But sometime around, it's definitely hire a list. We want people to be able to programmatically work with Gatsby Cloud, so we know it's definitely needed. And then, Kristen, this one you can answer for Brian. Can the site be predominantly static but have some pages that are always server-side rendered? I.e. a contentful blog, but interactive real estate map that updates in real time.
Yep. Let's see. Let's go to the code. So there's two different ways of telling Gatsby how to create a page. Kind of like one is this create page call in Gatsby node, but then there's also a file system based way. So anything in this pages directory, Gatsby is going to know is it needs to create a route there. So if you were to say, let's make a new file of, let's just call it SSR page, right? So this is our page that we want it to not be fully client-side rendered, right? But it needs to have super up-to-date data. So we can't do it statically either. So we would create our page. And let's say it returns, and I'm going to pseudocode this for the sake of time, right? It returns like some kind of count, right? And count is going to, I think it's called server data. Return server data. And then the way Gatsby does this is it has, if you have a function called get server data, I believe, Gatsby will know automatically like, hey, this needs to be SSR'd. So you can have a page like this that it's not going to be created statically. It's not going to be DSG either. It's not going to be the deferred static generation. It's just always going to be SSR. So you in here, you might have like fetch, my URL API, right? And then it's going to have response, return, response that counts. Well, you could just do.
Yeah, and actually linked to this is a question, is it possible to route force international user to specific domains, languages based on the country they're coming from on a multi-level project? I would say you could use the server-side stuff to control that logic, but you could also keep it static and use a function to return the correct data if you wanted to all push that on the edge. It's definitely something that the difference between us being able to do it is really like whether you want it to be fully static and make that transition on the edge, or whether it can be, the logic can be controlled by the server side.
Right. So yeah, that's something you could do with a serverless function. It's also something we're looking to build into Gatsby hosting. So that's been especially the enterprise level, that's been a pretty common request. Sometimes for rerouting, like you're talking about, but also for like blocking. It's like geofencing. Some people like have to block certain content in certain countries or something. So getting that location from the response is something that we're working on. Yes, you'd have to kind of work around it because it's more of like a hosting question than a front end question. Let's see, is it possible to fetch data from a REST API and GraphQL endpoint at the same time in Gatsby node? Absolutely. Great question. This goes back to like me loving the whole GraphQL data layer. Right here, we're fetching against Gatsby's internal GraphQL server to create pages. If you notice, we're using the GraphQL function that's provided to us by Gatsby. But say we wanted to source nodes, right? So there's a API called source nodes. And it's going to, again, I'm going to pseudocode for the sake of time, but it's in here, you can do whatever. Right. And then you're going to have create node, which is a helper function that's going to be passed in. Again, I'm just going off the cuff here, going to be something like that. Right. And you're going to pass in some options here. right? So, and do whatever, you can literally do whatever. You can source from the file system. You can go hit like a SOAP API. You can hit whatever you want. You know, in the end, it turns into basically JavaScript objects, and you pass it into create node, and it gets put into the GraphQL data layer. So super, super cool. This is basically what all the source plugins are doing. All the community source plugins that are popular have done this step in like a really robust way, right? They've just done it for you. They might have done it in a really generic way so that it can loop over lots of generic data and do it, but you can always do it super explicitly for whatever data source you might have. Let's see, did I miss any?
Yeah, no, a couple questions rolling into. All right, one, sometimes I have clients who mandate where they host. Is there documentation on how to set up incremental builds in Azure AWS? So for that, the build is actually still going to come from Gatsby Cloud. What you can then do is we can then integrate and push the static asset that is now built. We can deploy that to S3 if you need, or something like that. And we have documentation on support.gatsbyjs.com. So the incremental build portion is still part of the Gatsby Cloud product, and then you can host elsewhere.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the build takes place in one place, and then the hosting takes place somewhere else. Wait, I think we missed one from John, which looks like a good like overall question. Your talk is great, directed to the developer and developer teams, but the client simply does not understand all of this. Will go over their heads. Showing the speed is nice, but then the website is just a website as long as it looks modern and goes up on the web. How does the point get across as Gatsby is a competitor who can deliver at a much lower cost and quicker project completion with the many popular plug and play builders available? Yeah, I would point to the plugin ecosystem of how quickly you can get all the data available to your developers, and then I would point to the React ecosystem of saying, all right, now the data is so easy to make it available to our developers in the front end that then they can just build, and they can just build with React components. When you say plug and play, I assume you mean like kind of drag and drop, like Wix or Squarespace type stuff.
I was going to say there's another question down there about like Webflow, so we could probably just hit.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a whole nother question of like if you're using a React framework at all versus or any kind of front end framework at all compared to a drag and drop. That's kind of like a separate question that comes down to design control and really design control, like how much, if they really want like that button over there or something, and that doesn't work for whatever reason with the drag and drop. Also, the drag and drop things, you have like certain integrations for like calendars and things like that, and you're kind of boxed in sometimes. So saying, all right, if you want to have a calendar, you have to use this widget. It's the only widget there is. Otherwise, they have an option for like custom code, and then you end up just writing custom code anyways if that widget that they provide doesn't work for you. So React is just choosing the front end framework route. You just kind of start with all the flexibility. It's going to take longer to build over a drag and drop, but you're going to have more control, more flexibility. So kind of two questions there, like why Gatsby over other frameworks, and then why a framework at all over drag and drop. So
yeah, and the speed portion too. And I would generally say, like, again, from a client perspective, well, two things. One, from a drag and drop, we've been working a little bit, and I came across it, Plasmic.app. It's a really great headless drag and drop builder. So it's a way that looks very similar to like a Figma. It feels like that, feels like almost a Webflow, but it spits out a headless Gatsby site. It integrates with Gatsby Cloud. You can run it there. So that is like one thing. The other thing is, I would just say from a client perspective, like Gatsby is definitely geared towards like the performant growing business, right? The business where like their website is a factor of their brand, where they're competing against other websites in a niche that they need to either convert better than or be faster than for Google, like Lighthouse, to impact SEO. If it is like Main Street Dentist USA, like I'm not gonna lie, Gatsby is probably not the solution for them. It's just like we are not trying to solve that. We are trying to solve, I would say, like past that, a little bit more complex. Maybe you're running 100 dentist office and you are competing against in a large city. Like that is where we're going to start to go, like be the solution. Also, like from a what they're selling, if it's a high enough item where SEO is important, you can definitely start to push that as well, right? So if you're a lawyer, there's a couple lawyer offices in town, and they feel like, hey, I just have my WordPress like lawyer site. It's fine. Like it's been working for me. My clients like it. Yeah, you can explain to them, hey, there's 4 other lawyers in town. Every time someone searches on Google for that lawyer, you might not be coming up first because of the website. And that's where like it's really going to impact their wallet, and they're going to start to understand that, hey, the speed is definitely it's a deciding factor in whether I'm going to make 6 figures, 7 figures a year, whatever. Like it actually has an impact on the end game. So I would definitely pitch speed as that one. The second one is your control, and I think Grayson talked about that. It goes with the question that was just asked about backwards compatibility as well. We see that a lot with clients. They're worried about selecting like technologies that come and go. Decoupling is actually like almost a defensive pattern against that. They can stay in WordPress that they've had. Let's say they've had this WordPress instance for 10 years. They can stay and keep that instance running for the next 10 years. Just their front end is going to get better, right? Like it's going to look better. It's going to be faster, but the way they enter in information is still going to feel super familiar to them 20 years down the line. Same thing with even a new system. If you want to go back to an old system or change out, like you're still going to be able to swap that out because it's decoupled. We're not really like going all in on one locked in vendor because of that ability. And yes, Gatsby is it's a locked in vendor and per se of hosting, but it's an open source framework. It's built on top of React. The community is vibrant and growing. So from that perspective, I think it's the best we can do in all situations.
Cool. All right, a couple more questions. Timeline for the geo fencing thing. I don't know exactly. I think it's on Q1. I know we have a couple large enterprise clients where it's like become a requirement, which of course, puts up how soon again, and that's like a hosting thing, not a Gatsby thing. So whoever your hosting provider is who provides that. Gatsby hosting, yes, is something we're working on. We have some large clients that are requiring it. So it's, moving up in the list, I think like Q1 of 2022. About the SSR page created, where do you import that component? Yeah, great question. So because I put this in the templates folder, Gatsby doesn't do anything with it automatically. If it were in the pages folder, Gatsby would create a route automatically, but that would be one instance of the page. So if it's one in particular route, like say you have a /map page and there's only one map page, then I could rename this as map, right? We could rename it as map and move it up here, right? And so now Gatsby would create a route called map, and it would be a server-side rendered page. But let's say, we actually have a map per state, right? And so we need to go in here to Gatsby node. We're in our create pages function. We've made our blog post pages. So let's go below here and we're going to, create map pages. And, let's just imagine we got the map, the list of map pages we need to make. So we'd say like maps dot for each, right? And we loop over and we would create a page for each one. And let's say for the path, it would be like map / let's say like map dot country code. Right, and then our component would be, where is it? It would be like this. So this was kind of hidden away earlier. Like we would point to the template like this. I actually want to bring this out of the loop for a performance reason. So it only has to resolve that once, right? And then there's ways to get this country code inside of this function. Again, pseudocoding here, get the country code, and somehow this gets sent to our API, and you're in business, right? So that's hopefully answers that question. That'd be a realistic.
We'll answer two more questions that are on this too, actually.
Okay.
The one is, I want a static site, but I want it to be private. Users should log in. That one is one where like you would make your SSR page a page and have that be a login. And then after that, it can still be like generally static, which is nice.
Yeah. So a couple ways to do that. You can, if it's an SSR page, if you choose to do it that way, you can do it here. There's also a feature that we didn't really talk about. It's an open source feature called Gatsby Functions. So there's lots of demos of this online in our documentation. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you basically will, create login, log out. I think you need to have like a redirect for if you follow any like Auth0 or any kind of authentication library, you typically have to have like these three things. These are serverless functions. And then you would basically wrap the page in like a state provider. I mean, again, this is just React stuff at this point, not really Gatsby stuff. The going Gatsby aspect is like we now have our own serverless function. So normally you would have to have these serverless functions take place outside of Gatsby. Like a year ago, these would have had to exist like in AWS Lambda or something like that. And you would use your authentication provider. But now you can write these serverless functions. So this creates a route at your domain /API/login, and then it's a express style
write request.
Yeah, right. It's just a function, right?
That's rec.
Right, something like that, right? And then you write your login logic. Right, that's what they look like. It's just a serverless function, and then you can hit this with the login button, right? Then you have in your components, you'll have a login button that posts to domain /API login, passes in a username and whatever. And again, this is more like React patterns and less Gatsby patterns, but totally possible, totally doable. And then, yeah, you would probably do SSR, like Dan said, for performance reasons and not like client-side rendering, that stuff. But yeah, lots of good demos on that. We launched Gatsby Functions about 6 or 7 months ago, and this was like one of the most popular demos. So check that out.
Yep, for sure.
How to source data to GraphQL or from GraphQL? I'm not sure. After the static build, authenticated user-related data. Yeah, you'd probably use either, again, you'd probably use a serverless function like this, or you could SSR the whole page with the get server data function. But what database provider you can recommend for Gatsby Cloud Functions? Really anything.
Anything. I think we use Supabase in a lot of them.
Yeah, we use Supabase in one demo, but again, once you're in here, it's quote unquote just JavaScript, right? So pretty much anything you want to connect to in here, you could do that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people use Firebase is another one. I'm trying to think, Auth0 is a user-based kind of database, like authentication-based database. Really whatever. It's not really opinionated. I'd say Firebase and Supabase would have pretty good community and documentation. I think there's an AWS one as well. But yeah. Question is, does Gatsby support a basic continuous deployment functionality? I.e., when I deploy Gatsby and headless CMS on virtual private servers, do I need to install and set up third-party packages, solutions like Circle CI for that? An example would be I've deployed the website built with Gatsby and Strapi-based CMS on a VPS recently, and I need to render updated content requested from Strapi. I need to call Gatsby build command with the help of webhook emitted by Strapi and captured by the webhook package. It works, sort of. Is there a more elegant solution? Yes. Not trying to be a salesperson, but you just described Gatsby Cloud. Like that's what we built. That's what we built Gatsby Cloud to do, so that you don't have to do it yourself. Like that's exactly what it does. I didn't use Strapi as an example. But part of what it does is it recognizes webhooks from different CMSs slightly differently to handle them in the best way. So And then it does true incremental builds, and not like I noticed you said you run Gatsby build, right? So that's going to be what we call an open source incremental build, right? Like it is incremental, but what Gatsby Cloud does is like a layer on top of that, like infrastructure that we built separately is this data update, right? So an incremental build would be fast, full build slow, well, still fast, but slower, right? Incremental build, like open source incremental build, faster, right? There's lots of good caching that Gatsby uses, but these data updates, we call them like cloud builds, is where Gatsby Cloud recognizes this is purely a data change. It's coming from one of these supported CMSs. That webhook is going to tell me what content has changed, and I'm only going to rebuild the content that has changed. And that's like the fastest one. As far as the like Circle CI stuff, yeah, you can, most people set it up. This has like a GitHub app, that hooks into your repo. I don't know if I have it turned on for this one, but let's see, settings, integrations. Yeah, so see, I have a Gatsby Cloud app connected here. Then you can do like GitHub Actions is a common one. Like we have Circle CI and Gatsby Cloud set up for our internal docs and and Gatsby core. So yes, you can set all that up through Gatsby Cloud. You can set it up through whatever. Not a problem. Let's see. Any other ones? Oh, that's Dan. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all the questions.
I think so too, actually. That was amazing. Hour and 15 minutes, jam-packed. Thank you so much, Grayson. Thanks for everyone participating too. That was great. And we will most likely be back here probably first thing next year with some more agents. Yeah.
Sorry, I did see one other question that I scrolled past.
Go for it.
Where did it go? I said you mentioned there was a way to, yeah, you mentioned, this is from Ben. You mentioned there was a way to have Gatsby work with us on a new project, doing something we haven't done before. I'm a fairly new developer in general, especially to Gatsby, so I might need more help than most. Is this meant for someone like me as well? So the offering that we talk about is, we call it Gatsby Concierge. It is geared more towards, agencies over a certain size or enterprise clients with like an internal dev team, so if you're like a freelancer, it's probably not going to be a good fit for you. But that's why the Gatsby community is great. The docs are great. There's a Discord server, there's GitHub discussions, there's the issue queue. So, and then depending on the CMS you're using, you can kind of go into their Slack channels or Discords as well. Like I'm in the Contentful Slack and those Datto CMS Slack and some of these other groups, they tackle it more from the CMS side. I'm in Drupal Slack, WordPress Slack. So like there's a lot of community around it. So I would lean on the docs and the community first. The solution we were talking about is typically large organizations that need that. Can you share a link to Supabase? Yeah, Dan got it in there. Cool. I think that is now officially all the questions.
All right. Bye, everyone. Enjoy. Have a good rest of your day. And Grayson, thank you again.
Yep. Thank y'all so much.
This will be out in 2 days, so everyone will get an email.
See ya.
Thank you all.